welcome back to the Ideal 2022 session. We're very excited to have Julie Kratz with us today. She's highly acclaimed TEDx speaker and inclusive leadership trainer who's going to describe allyship in action today. So before we get fully launched, just a few quick housekeeping things. As we go through today's session, there might be some concepts or maybe some ideas that are unfamiliar to you. Please feel free to jump into the chat or to the Q&A button and ask any questions you have. We just ask that we keep the conversation respectful, and knowing that this is a wonderful learning community, I'm sure that won't be an issue at all. But again, feel free to ask any questions you have. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Julie.
Thank you. Thanks, all. Great to be with everybody. Happy Monday after holiday break if you are here in the United States. I know the first Monday back and only a few more working weeks before we all have another holiday. So it's kind of fun. I think good, fun learning time as well. So that's my hope today, is that you walk away with some tangible strategies, techniques, some ideas for what we call allyship in action. And just a bit about me and my background. I've been connected here with the team for some time, and the research I do on allyship, as well as podcasts I host. And I've had the opportunity to do a TED Talk on the subject, as well as really connect this centrally to my purpose and why I do diversity, equity, and inclusion work is really because of my kiddos. I want the world to be more inclusive for them. And when we're centuries away from equity forecasts, unfortunately, happening, whether that's by gender or race, we have some work to do. And I really want the world to be more inclusive for them. And that's why I keep showing up in these spaces. So my hope for you in the next half an hour or so, and we'll have plenty of opportunity, check out the chat, ask questions. I'll be bebopping back and forth there. I can't see it while I'm presenting, unfortunately, but I will be checking that periodically, and I'll be asking you some questions as well. So what I want to introduce is just like 10 practices. So this content's based on my latest book, Allyship in Action, which is kind of a culmination of the last 8 years doing research and writing books and literature about allyship and how to be there and support people that are different from yourselves. So I'm going to share those 10 practices, give you some actionable tools and ideas to start and continue and advance the conversation even around DEI. And then there's some cool assessment questions I'll ask you that are really fun, that you can easily use as an icebreaker activity for your next team meeting, a discussion with your family, really in all spheres of your life. I don't think there's an on or off switch to allyship. So the first question I wanted to ask you is just, what does that term mean to you? I kind of vaguely define it on purpose because I think that we need to co-create these terms and definitions. So if you want to pick a few words and share in the chat, what does allyship mean to you? I'll kind of pop over there so I can see the chat. Love to think about, what does allyship mean to you? Thanks, Louise, for sharing in the chat. And Louise was actually on our podcast not too long ago about allyship, so you can check out that episode, the Diversity Pivot podcast. But appreciate you sharing the link. And all the research I'll be sharing today is based off that book. And being there for people who need you, advocacy, support without dominating. Yes, I think that's the teeter-totter. It's like, how do I support but not overtake the space and make it about me? Holding space for others to be their authentic selves and supporting them in whatever ways they need. Yeah, it is. It's meeting people where they're at, supporting others who don't benefit from the same privilege that you do. Oh, yeah. The P word is very real, and one that we have to understand if we want to be allies. There are certain privileges we all have. And it's not just based just on race and gender. There's way more to the conversation than those. But leveraging my privilege, I like to say privilege is a chance to be helpful to somebody that's different than you. Being a partner, a friend. Yeah, I think about that in the personal spaces for sure. Supporting others different from you. That's how I put it most simply, because I feel like that definition can be very broad. It can be personal, it can be professional, it can be, and support can look very different. It can be co-defined, hopefully, by the person we're hoping to be helpful for. Yes, being supportive, centering others, amplifying the voices of others. Yeah, being an advocate for everyone, listening in and leaning in and not taking up the space. I think that's a delicate balance of performative versus active allyship that we'll talk about today. There's a big difference. Oh, keep the good chats coming. I absolutely love that. Thank you so much for sharing. So, just getting back to the conversation here, y'all mentioned what you think allyship is, and maybe I think it's helpful to think about what it isn't. And so it's not making it about me, right? I think y'all did a great job in the chat on that one. It's not putting on a rescue cape and saving the day for somebody else. That's not sustainable, and that's not even really that helpful. It's helping people solve their own problems. And the big difference between active and performative allyship, if you think back a couple summers ago, when racial justice was really taking, rightfully so, a spotlight in the conversation, is a lot of folks joined the conversation then and showed up at the protest, did the selfie, read the book, did a book club, and then kind of retreated from the conversation afterwards. And this was so problematic because at the very time we need our allies is when we saw withdrawal of allies. And there's some data that shows, activity has actually waned and been reduced over the last couple years. The same folks that were talking actively are no longer talking. And why is that, right? And certainly you can attribute some backlash effects. I'm seeing a continued progress in the corporate spaces, but also a hesitance with an uncertain economy, the political cycle. So performative allyship is not accepting excuses. Okay, and so that's where active allyship is. It's a consistent, intentional, daily approach to allyship. There's no on and off switch. You can't just do it when it's cool and in social media and your news feed, which is hard because as humans we gravitate towards the hot topics, what's going on, but real allies stay the course long term. It's a journey, not a destination. So just some key terms to unpack. Y'all are probably very familiar with. Just a level set though, diversity is really about representation. So when you use the word diversity, we're talking about representation and not just race and gender. Okay, this could be age, this could be disability, neurodiversity is a huge part of this conversation. You can see other examples of body size, ability, wealth, socioeconomic status has been a big part of this conversation, mental health, definitely sexuality or sexual orientation. Equity is more about systems work. So, how do we meet people where they're at and provide the level of tools and support they need? If they're not represented, especially in leadership levels, how do we create equity through system support? And then inclusion is about belonging, it's about feeling a sense that not only am I there, but I can speak up and it's psychologically safe for me to speak up. And unfortunately, most folks don't feel a sense of belonging, especially in their workspaces. So feel free to add more to the list in the chat. It's more than race and gender. I could probably add dozens of other variables or dimensions here on this slide, but here's some ones to kick off that conversation. Here's another myth with DEI work that somehow it's a zero-sum game. I have a feverish debate going on my LinkedIn right now because of a meme that I post about white men being involved in the conversation. And, I think at the simplistic message, people think, oh, great, that you're now calling in a group that already benefits from the society as a whole. Well, that's not the point. The point is it's not my pie slice versus your pie slice. Point is we grow the pie together, and there's tons of data that shows the business case for DEI with innovation rates, better decision making, higher revenues, higher profitability as well. Because I mentioned before, I think the challenge with allyship and the challenge with DEI work in the spaces we work in is that there's this on and off switch. There's this idea that it's an initiative, that it's something we do. We cross off our to-do list, and there's no start or stop. And there's no start or stop for us between work and home either. We certainly learned that in a hybrid workplace, because it's really become front and center that we can't be a good ally if we're not doing these things in all places in our lives. And I think about this from a kid's perspective. We mirror what we see in the world. So as human beings, we have mirror neurons. And so we're constantly looking for social cues of what's okay, what's not okay. And when we have these conversations in our personal spaces, kids start to see that it's not something to be feared, that we can have, really complicated conversations where maybe there's not 100% agreement, and that's okay. But we mirror what we see. If we shush something our kids say, then they learn that it's not safe to talk about those things. Here's another reason why we don't talk about this in home spaces. This is all home spaces. If any of you spend some time with family over the holidays, it's like, no religion, no politics, not even the news anymore. It's like, what can we talk about? But here's the reason we don't talk about DEI is one is we want to be the expert. And I know we've got a lot of experts here with us today. I am constantly challenged by people having different facts, different levels of expertise. And so when we don't feel like we're the expert or know enough, it creates fear and a reluctance to talk about it. We also want to protect children. We want to protect people in our lives we care about. No. It's this really well-intentioned but problematic behavior, because when was the last time you solved a problem without acknowledging the problem exists? It's about control too. I don't like it when I'm not in control. These messy conversations, certainly you relinquish that control. It's not about what I know, it's about what do we know together. But the main benefit is that we know that we learn more from people that are different from us. We grow. I know I personally feel like I become a better partner, a better ally, a better mother, a better caregiver, a better business owner, because of surrounding myself with people different from myself. And the more I am attracted towards people like me, as many of us are with affinity bias, the more we kind of get that like me insulated network, and the less that we learn and expand. Because by definition, if I'm hanging out with people like me, I'm hearing a lot of people say things just like I would say. So let's dig into the 10 practices, and I'd love to hear your perspectives on these. Have a question to kind of think about what practices resonate with you. So I'm going to go through the 10 practices from the Allyship in Action book. And the first one's the why. And this is intentionally the first step, because what I've found in my DEI work is if you don't have a strong why for why you're here, then you're not going to stay very long. And this is a question I posed to a client a couple months ago as they started their DEI journey. I asked all of their task force members, what is your why for this? And they really struggled to define it. And I thought, ooh, it's okay if you don't have the answer now, but if you can't wrestle and dig deep and find that answer personally, professionally, or business case, human case, whatever it is, there's a combination usually of rational thought and emotional ideas that resonate. So why do you care about diversity, equity, and inclusion? For most people, the research shows it's justice and fairness. If you remember being a kid, that's not fair. As human beings, we just have this natural wiring for justice and fairness. So think about your why. If you can't think about your why, that's a good first stop to jot that down. Why do I care about diversity, equity, and inclusion? And I would dig deep beyond it's the right thing to do. For me, it's my kiddos, right? Wanting them to live in a more inclusive place. Quite frankly, the whole next generation just deserves better than the experiences I had in corporate environments. The second practice is empathy. And empathy is different than sympathy. It's not about feeling sorry for somebody. It's not about even walking in the shoes of someone else, because I don't know about you, but I wear a size 9.5 wide shoe. Not many people wear that shoe size. So I don't know if I want someone walking in my shoes, or I don't think I want to walk in someone else's shoes. I'd rather try to understand the perspective of somebody else. And so it's more about perspective taking, more about trying to understand something you have not lived. And that's a big theme in the diversity space, right? Lived experience. If you haven't had the lived experience of someone else, it's really hard to resist judging that experience. But that's what empathy is pausing and not judging somebody for being different, but trying to understand why they might be different. Vulnerability, understanding that it's not about having the answers, is oftentimes allies say, I don't know. It's about admitting mistakes, and those stumbles and bumbles along the way are inevitable. It's about progress over perfection, and just embracing my weaknesses and trying to leverage my strengths as an ally. So leaning into vulnerability is, I don't know what it's like, right? And not letting that stop you from doing something. but leaning into it and doing it afraid anyway. And then there's curiosity, which I promise did not kill the cat. I have 2 cats and they're very curious. But curiosity is good for humans too. And we almost unlearn this as we get older. We forget what it's like to just embrace, what do I not know yet? What is the gap between the knowledge I have and the knowledge I hope I had? And who could help fill in those curiosity gaps? So this is the real benefit of allyship too. The more we get curious about folks that are different from us, again, the more we learn, the more we grow together. And then emotions, emotions are a huge part of this conversation. We can't fully quiet our emotions. And so emotions sometimes cloud our judgment and create fear in speaking up into the conversations we need to be a part of. How do we channel our emotions for good? And one of that's just embracing not just emotional intelligence, that's been around for a while, but emotional agility. If anyone's familiar with Susan David's work, it's this idea that toxic positivity, just throwing a wet blanket on things like, oh, it's better than it used to be, or like it'll get better miraculously. Those aren't helpful things to say to somebody when they're in pain. People want that pain to be acknowledged. They want to be believed. They want to be heard. They want to be seen. And so, how do we acknowledge the emotions of others? Understand our emotions. Fun fact, most humans can only label about 3 basic emotions. And if you're trying to guess, you're probably right. Happy, sad, mad. It's like the language of a 2-year-old. There's actually 87 different emotions that Brene Brown has studied in her latest book, Atlas of the Heart. And she dispels like a lot of the emotional granularity. Understanding the different emotions helps us better understand how we're coming into a conversation, and how we can manage not just our emotions, but influence the emotions of others as well. Courage is another practice as an ally, and be thinking about areas that resonate with you. What are some that resonate with you, and what are some ones that maybe, if you're like me, I got to flex and I got to lean into a little bit more. Courage is certainly one that's hard for me. Now, I question things sometimes. Is this too much? Is this too little? What's just right? And in the DEI world, there's this constant pendulum swing, and I'm trying to stay in that 90% in the middle. But it's hard sometimes to know what's going to cause someone pain, or what could be perceived differently than how I perceive it. So courage is doing things even if you're not sure it's going to work out, right? It's kind of like vulnerability. It's like, I'm going to lean into this without the expectation, and it's going to go smoothly, because rarely is a continuous step up. There's going to be setbacks along the way. This is where I think courage for conversation, where we acknowledge, our own mistakes, microaggressions that maybe we've participated in, or non-inclusive behaviors of others, and called people in to be better. Something we talk about is shame and blame rarely create positive behavior change with somebody else. It's really having the courage to call somebody in and say, hey, when you said that, what do you mean by that? Or, hey, I have a different perspective on that. Or, hey, I'd like to clarify what I meant. And could you clarify what you meant? Right? It's asking those open-ended questions and getting a two-way conversation going. I think that's where the coaching mindset really helps too. I remember when I first did my coaching certification early on, 8 years ago when I started this business, the 2 most powerful words I inserted into my vocabulary were what and how. And when I think about the work in the DEI space, those are powerful words. What do you mean? How did you get there? What do you think? Help me understand. How do you think we should go about this? What are your ideas? Those what and how questions, and help me understand, or please describe, or say more, are really powerful to better understanding the lived experiences and the perspectives of others. When we ask close-ended questions like do, could, should, would, am, any helping verb at the beginning of a question, it's likely to result in a yes or no, or a very succinct, not very in-depth type of response. If you want to learn more about somebody, practicing that coaching mindset. And coaching's less about advice giving, and it's a lot more about self-reflection and getting someone to self-discover their own path forward. Just a couple more practices here, and then I want to bebop in the chat and see which ones are resonating with you and answer any questions that you have. Accountability is incredibly powerful. And when I think about us standing together and holding each other accountable, the most powerful force of accountability is peer-to-peer accountability. So, how am I helping hold other people in my network accountable to DEI? How am I helping my clients be accountable to DEI? How am I holding myself accountable for my learning goals and my development in DEI? And this is the piece I think it's really been missing in the corporate spaces until lately. We're starting to see measurement reports. Pay equity is now required for 3 US states and globally, many places. And so this accountability factor is growing with metrics and numbers. But if organizations could be more proactive, and we could be more proactive as allies in maintaining accountability for this continued conversation, I think we'd all be better. Y'all already mentioned the P word, which sometimes jars people a little bit. Privilege doesn't mean you didn't work hard. Privilege doesn't mean you don't deserve what you have. Privilege just simply means that I have advantages that I haven't had to think about. Right? So for me as a white person DEI work, I'm painfully aware of the fact that I don't have to think about my skin color in many settings. Now, when I do DEI work, I do. And I have to acknowledge that privilege that comes with this. And when I think about the privileges that I have, being a straight, cisgender, non-disabled white woman, it's really on my gender that can hold me back occasionally, and even that, not always. And so, how do I leverage the other dimensions that I have of privilege to be helpful for other people that are different from me that don't have those same privileges? And then, last but not least, is inspiration. We say the status quo is the enemy of diversity. And how do we inspire other allies to join the conversation? How do we engage more people and spread? By modeling the change we hope to see, we start to see this like domino effect come into play. And I've seen it happen in organizations, especially when senior leadership is the one that's modeling it and inspiring others around us. Again, it's that consistency, it's that intentionality, it's making sure that this is a ongoing conversation. One of my clients has a DEI snackable that they do. And every team meeting that they have, every couple of weeks, they do like a 5-minute learning exercise or discussion question around DEI. And I just love that because it's continued inspiration. It's not this big, offsite that takes all this time to plan and a bunch of money. You can find resources regularly available online that are, highly reputable that can help support that conversation too. So again, just asking what practices resonate with you. If you want to pick an example, I'm going to bounce over to the chat. But I mentioned quite a few: empathy, vulnerability, accountability, a lot of E's, inspiration, coaching, courage, privilege. Just curious what ones might be resonating with you. And I'll check on the chat here. Accountability for sure. Yeah, calling people in versus calling them out. I appreciate that. If you want, there's a fantastic resource, Loretta J. Ross. She has a TED Talk on calling people in that I always recommend to folks. Being an advocate. Yep. Oh, this is awesome. A long-term commitment needs to be grounded in your values. Yeah, and how do you tie DEI to your values? How is it a part of how you operate? Naturally, because I think it's an extra thing. Sometimes it doesn't feel genuine and it feels like extra work. Empathy, accountability. Yeah, without it, it's hard to see what you're actually doing. I agree. Why my DEI committee at work seems to be struggling with our foundations. Yeah, and that's a really good question to start. Why do we care about this? And sometimes I'll do that as like a pre-work question for folks, or sometimes I'll use like a polling software where people can do that. But really reflecting in my why. We have some additional thought questions too in the book to get people to better articulate their why. And what I like to think about is, why does this matter now? Right. And that was a fun question to ask a couple years ago, but I think it's even more fun now. It's like, why now? What if nothing changes? Like, what would that look like? Yeah. Yeah, good stuff here. So, any questions? I'm just going to spend a little bit more time on. I have two other ideas I wanted to share with you, and then we can open it up for questions. But happy to take any questions you might have now, too. Finding the right metrics. Yeah, I just saw that in the chat. And there's a lot of different ways to measure DEI. We have some partners that do like really deep dive analytics, but I think a couple of things to consider. One, representation data. I think that's what everyone goes to, but not just that, it's inclusion data. So can you pull that from existing employee engagement surveys or attitudinal assessments? But also focus groups or listening sessions can be done for any size of an organization. You can really capture, what are the challenges? What are the things that are holding us back? I think right now I have some organizations that are kind of pulling back on their DEI efforts. And my question to them is like, well, what does that look like in a labor shortage environment where we know young people really have an unwavering commitment to DEI? What's that going to look like if you pull back? How are you going to answer those questions about what you're working on? Because increasingly, folks are asking about that in the application process and the interview process, and communities and customers are also asking too. Really good stuff. Okay, I don't see any questions there yet, so I'm just going to do a quick share. Just a couple more things I wanted to share with you. Oops, I hit the beginning button. So all of those practices, what do I do with it? You might be thinking. So I want to give everybody some actionable ideas because I struggle with principles. I want to take action. And allies do take action because if we don't take action, it's the same as saying it's okay. Silence is compliance. It's like saying the status quo is all right. We're going to keep on going. Because when did you ever solve a problem without acknowledging, the problem existed? But it's also not limited to like a linear process. It's not like step one, step two, step three. It is a choose your own adventure approach. So I want to give you some ideas to choose your own adventure. And one of them, we call this the ally network idea, activity rather. And one idea is to write down the top 10 people you choose to spend time with. And you might look in your smartphone, who do you text with, email with, who's on your calendar, who do you call? And this is who you choose to spend time. It's not necessarily your family, your coworkers. It's for the short term, that's probably not changeable. And then take an inventory of their dimensions of difference. And when I say dimensions of difference, it's not just race and gender, but LGBTQ plus, ethnicity, family culture, veteran is one that people don't think about a lot. Age, language, where people are from, class. And then compare the representation to the list of your identities. What people usually find through this activity is that they spend a lot of time with folks like them. Okay, and so I was really startled 8 years ago when I started this business and did this activity. I was like, oh, holy smokes, I need to do better. If I want to be more involved in DEI work, I need to diversify my network because I was spending time with white women, that were business owners and mothers, right? And that had to get better for me to get better as an ally. And thankfully, I was able to do that in large part to social media, following a lot of different types of people, and also participating in lots of different networking groups, online and in person. And then here's another identity activity. So write down the identities, of which represent you and your lived experience. So again, based on those dimensions of difference down at the bottom, rank which identities matter the most to you personally and professionally, and share with somebody. So really, if you have a healthy degree of trust in your work team, I highly encourage you to do this. This is definitely going to take, depending on the size of the group, it's not a few minute exercise, is a longer conversation. But I know when I did this, me as a mother was very important, as a business owner was very important, and as a woman was very important to me. So my caregiving status was really important to me. My career is really important to me, as well as my gender. And so for other people, that could be very vastly different. And that question of like, why? Why are those things important to you? I think it's just really powerful to learn more about people we spend a lot of time with at work or personally. And then the media activity. This is a fun one too. And don't be disappointed in yourself if you don't like what you hear. I remember I started doing my inclusion school podcast with my friend Simone. And one of our guests said, look at your bookshelf, look at the diverse representation or lack thereof on your bookshelf. And children's books are notorious for not being very diversely represented, but so are movies, so are media programming. So make a tally, of your favorite films, your favorite books, the favorite content that you consume, and just tally up the dimensions of difference and reflect on how representative your media exposure is and how it could be more inclusive. We have a full resources list I'll share in the chat too on our website that's been well vetted. And you could take a ton of these activities, these videos, books, podcasts, etc., and make your own activity too. So we're, again, a big fan of choose your own adventure. So any ideas resonate with you? Those were just 3 activities we have from the Allyship in Action book, but there are so many more ways that you can demonstrate and have ongoing conversations about allyship. Yeah, I need to diversify my bookshelf for sure. And that's a really common issue that people have. And it's because that's how a lot of our just a lot of systems have been defined by the majority group, right? Until recently, children's films in particular are very problematic. When I go to watch an older Disney film, it has a disclaimer about stereotypes and racial issues with the film. And so just sharing that no one's perfect on this journey. We have been very intentional with the types of films that we show our children. But I know that my 8-year-old gets on YouTube and experiences the world beyond what I can control. So all we can do is try and set that example. Yeah, so the resources, again, have a ton of these ideas and more. So I just shared that link in the chat. I really intentionally diversified my social media circles, especially LinkedIn and Instagram over the last few years. My husband and son are Native American, so I tend to focus on trying to amplify those voices. Oh, that's so cool. That's an area I'm really interested in. Children's books, for example, it's 1% Indigenous people centered in those stories. And I haven't found enough books to understand Native American culture. So if you have any recommendations, please do share. How does sharing my identity with others contribute to allyship? I think it's a conversation with others. So ideally, the identity exercise is about a small work team that can share together. So when I went through my unconscious bias certification, that was an activity we did and we led as a small group. I would say maybe 6 or 8 folks around a table talking about our identities, what was important to us, and why. So it's meant to be a communal exercise, not just us saying, "Hey, here are my identities. I'm the ally." Not a self-proclamation. That's not the way allyship works. What I watch on Netflix and Hulu could be more diverse. I like fantasy fiction, which is historically not a diverse. Yeah, I think that's just acknowledging that, right? We're not perfect. It's progress over perfection and being mindful of that. Braiding sweetgrass. Oh, thanks, Ashley, for the recommendation there. Yeah, that's so good. Other thoughts, other questions here? And any other resource or book recommendations, I think those are also welcomed. I agree that making intentional choices about you, Read, is so important. It helps us understand others who have identities different from our own. Yeah, and even if there's diverse representation, if the film or book hasn't been written by somebody of that community, it can lead to a false it's a false narrative. One of the things I liked about, not perfect, but Encanto, the new Disney movie, it's about a year old now, is that they hired consultants to help base the story off of like real lived experiences in Colombia. Now, it would have been better had they been the directors and filmmakers, of course, but a step in the right direction nonetheless. Ooh, we had a little real estate problem. Oh, my Native American. Oh, comedians. Yes, I am so checking that out. Oh, yeah, the land coming off the Thanksgiving holiday here in the US. It was just so painful to try to find a way to celebrate, and not in a cultural, appropriate way that honors history, but the reality of the false history a lot of us learned. Star Wars and Finding Nemo. Nav. Oh, overdubs. I didn't know that. That is something new. Watch Prey and Comanche overdub and subtitles. Oh, good recommendations here. So I'm just going to leave you with one kind of last thought idea. And again, feel free to share in the chat other questions, stories, ideas. But kind of think about one of those, one thing you could do. So I just give you a bunch of different ideas, but maybe you pick something off the resources list. Maybe you do one of those activities. The idea is an ongoing conversation. One of the things we like to do when we're working with folks on inclusion is just self-assess where you're at. What's your starting point? So do you know your ally why, for example? And this is for you personally, but you could easily do this again with a work group or your family. But just think about why this is important to me. Do I listen to learn from others different from myself? Do I understand what I know and don't know as an ally? Do I stay curious just a little longer than others? Am I conscious of the emotions and conversations about DEI? When I see something, I speak up, I say something, a courage piece. I refrain from giving advice or making it about me, as y'all said early on in the conversation. Easier said than done, as somebody that hopes to be an ally. And that's something I hope we all recognize, that it's a continuum. It's not a self-proclamation. So I can't ever say I'm an ally. I'd always say I'm an ally in training. I strive to be an ally. I'm hoping to be an ally. It's aspirational language, right? It's a lifelong journey. I refrain from giving advice or making it about me. I keep my ally radar up for those microaggressions or non-inclusive behaviors. I see privilege as a chance to be helpful. And then I understand diversity means doing things differently to inspire others around me and challenge the status quo. And, I'll get pushback of like, really, Julie, like, do we always have to bring this up? And it's like, if we continue to accept less, we will get less. And so how do you advocate for better? And dismantling the status quo isn't easy. The systems that have benefited some for many, many years are not going to be easy to dismantle. So we need all voices speaking up for positive change. So think about the ally attributes you feel are your strengths on the assessment. What are the opportunities? And then I'd encourage everybody just to pick one thing, one thing from today's conversation you could take action on right away. Maybe it was one of the practices that you can get more intentional with or consistent with. Maybe it was some of the activities we talked about. Maybe it's looking at this assessment and thinking about how could I, think about myself and my organization, right? And how would we measure these behaviors for myself or for the broader organization as well? So I'll kind of take a pause there and check on the chat. So the attributes that you feel like are your strengths in the assessment and opportunities, feel free to put those in the chat. And I'll just leave you with the last couple of thoughts. One of the things that I ask a lot of people that are different from me, folks with disabilities, folks in the LGBTQ plus community, people of color, what is something I could be doing more of, right? Seeking that feedback intentionally. And the number one thing I hear is that we want you to keep talking. Please keep talking. Please don't stop, because as somebody that experiences the adversity of diversity, when you speak into something that you don't directly benefit from, your voice is heard differently. So that is a challenge that I have chosen to accept, which means there's no on and off switch, which sometimes can be exhausting. But I realize that's my privilege if I get to think I get to turn it off, right? So I encourage you stay connected. I really enjoyed getting to know Luis this year, and just again, we have a great podcast episode where we talked about these things and more. You can definitely check that out, as well as the Allyship in Action book. I post every day on LinkedIn. There's a hot thread going on right now if you want to join in over there. I don't always get it perfect. There's sometimes some lively debate that happens over there. But yeah, definitely follow me on LinkedIn, or send me a note. If you want to talk about this, if you're planning for activities for next year, want to think about these ideas, just feel free to send me a note. I always respond to my email, usually the same day. So I'll stop there and pause for questions or thoughts that you all have. I see some chats going on here. Oh, thanks for sharing some PBS articles. I find podcasts that discuss popular culture help to raise my awareness on how movies and shows are seen by folks from different perspectives. Isn't it interesting when you think about different perspectives, how unique they really are? Check Selena Bookshelf Inc. for a lot of great books by Native Americans. Oh, I'll check that out. I'm learning things today. Thank you so much. So, thoughts on this? Candidly, where do you think you are? What questions do you have? Welcome you to share into the conversation.
And Julie, while people are getting their thoughts together, I just wanted to pause and just tell you thank you for for spending time with us today. I've learned a ton. I'm by no means an ally. I am an ally. I aspire to be one. But I've really learned a lot, from everything that you talked about today, especially like courage. I think that's the main thing, especially maybe for
Mm.
people people like us who come in here with a certain amount of privilege. It takes a lot of courage to step into that space and knowing that you're going to be doing it imperfectly and doing it anyway. I think that's a huge thing. I mean, that's that's the first big step into getting into this and getting on that journey to allyship.
It is. It's probably the hardest one for me too, because I was conditioned as a young person to like play it safe, don't upset people, don't speak up too much, especially white women. I think there's some really interesting conversation going on. Has anyone seen Deconstructing Karen? It's a documentary that just came out.
It sounds amazing.
I haven't watched it yet, but I am deeply curious. But there's a lot of conversation, especially for white women right now, about like y'all aren't doing enough to speak up on these issues, and it's very frustrating to marginalized communities. And it resonates with me because of how I was raised and how I was conditioned and how certain elements of our culture benefit me. And I thought about protecting that and then realized somehow in the journey that that was anything that is marginalizing others is a negative effect on me. So I need to speak into the issues that haven't directly impacted me. But that was like a real like wrestling that had to be undone. And I think when we think about how we continue to raise kids and kind of put on that blinder mindset, it hurts the ability to have courage. So I'm hopeful though. I'm hopeful. Oh, someone put it in the chat. The deconstructing Karen. Y'all, if you check it out, I've been meaning to check it out. It just dropped like last week, so I haven't seen it yet. An area I'm looking to do better is in what to say or do when I witness a microaggression without making the person feel attacked and I facilitate a productive conversation. I know what it feels like, but it's hard to explain. Yep. Yeah, and I just have, like, back pocket little interrupters I like to use with microaggressions, like, "What'd you mean when you said that?" Like, just and usually a one-on-one, like a circle back conversation is gonna go better than, like, publicly in front of the group unless you're just in a small group or you have a really high ability of trust in the group. Um, but that "What did you mean?" Or, like, the one-word audibles, like, "Ouch," "Whoa." Sometimes so long just to disrupt the conversation before it gets worse. Especially if there's somebody there that you can see is, like, shell-shocked or in pain. Like, just you gotta find a way to neutralize it in the moment. Help me understand, your perspective or, "Oh, I have a different perspective on that." Let's discuss this rather than, like, "You're wrong, and that was racist." Like, while it might be true sometimes, we probably don't wanna shame or blame somebody. I've had some negative experiences myself. We're not trying to sugarcoat it, but finding a way to get their perspective and sharing your perspective is really the goal. It's hard for me to listen and enjoy these sessions because my online producer. My ADHD self. Yeah, if it's directed at someone else, I usually take my lead from the person experiencing it. Yeah, and it's not fair for them to always have to defend themselves or bring light to issues that they didn't create. And so it's this delicate balance as an ally. You don't wanna save the day and make it about you, but you also don't want to let the person experience the pain and not have any accountability around it too. So I totally get it. If I'm not sure, I just ask the person, like, hey, I saw that. Like, what does support look like for you? Like, is it helpful for me to say something or not say something? I'm totally fine either way. I just want you to know I saw that. And I think the acknowledgement that I saw that, I bared witness to that, is very powerful in itself. Good stuff.
That's great advice. I'm going to keep that in mind. Yeah, that's
No
great
right way to
advice.
do it. I've stumbled and bumbled many times over the years. And it's so interesting when people feel safe still sharing it and saying out loud when we're specifically talking about DEI, people will microaggress and make rude comments. And it's like, wow, we are still here. And I think we've come a long way. I'm very hopeful about the future. I think, again, this younger generation they're coming in. They'll be asking a lot more of these questions too. And not that my generation didn't try to. I think we gave up a little too quickly though. Yeah, there's so many isms. I hear you. Assuming positive intent. I agree. Like, if this person's coming from a positive place, what could that be? And we're not going to let them get out, not hold them accountable. They need to be held accountable, but you can also do it in a kind way, a respectful way. Awesome. I think we're at time, so I want to be mindful of that, y'all. It's been so fun to spend time with you. Stay in touch. I put my contact info in the chat and the resources list. Thanks so much, Bridget, for moderating today, and Louise for having me.
Excellent. Thank you, Julie. We really appreciate it. Really appreciate all your experience and all these really actionable tips for how we can start practicing this day to day in our own work. So we really appreciate that.
Thank you.
So thanks for tuning into this session. We have another one coming up, and you'll pardon me as I'm looking at my schedule because it's the day after Thanksgiving and my brain is I don't know where. We have another session starting in about an hour. That's going to be The Future is Evolutionary. That I'm really interested in that one. That sounds really fascinating. So check in with us in about an hour. There's also, I believe, some spaces out in the main Air Meet area where you can hang out and start a table, maybe continue the conversation from ideas you've learned today, and just meet with some other like-minded folks who are here to learn. And until then, we'll see you later. Thank you again.